Consumer Forum. And tonight, my name's Allison Ritterford. I'm a certified nutrition consultant here in Scottsdale. Tonight, we have a very exciting topic. It's intermittent fasting. That is something that people ask me about all the time. I don't think I've had a client who has not asked me about intermittent fasting. I am hoping to learn something new tonight. Our speaker tonight is Dr. David Crutchfield. As a graduate of the University of Nevada Medical School, Dr. Crutchfield completed his residency in emergency medicine at UC Davis in Sacramento. Since 1998, he's practiced in a variety of settings that encompass community emergency departments, level 1 trauma centers, and rural critical access hospitals. Before embarking on his lifelong dream of medical school, Dr. Crutchfield worked for 14 years in law enforcement, retiring at the rank of lieutenant. Dr. Crutchfield's interests include obesity medicine, metabolic health, and emergency cardiology, inspired by his own personal and family health journey. As an American Academy of Emergency Medicine diplomat for over 20 years, Dr. Crutchfield recently was nominated to the Ethics Committee. He is board certified in emergency medicine and became SMHP accredited earlier this year. He's currently working as medical director for a large local government healthcare agency here in Phoenix and provides metabolic health information and consultations through OurLowCarb.com with his wife, Jane, who's a critical care and forensic nurse. With his presentation on intermittent fasting, please welcome Dr. David Crutchfield.
You may be wondering, why an emergency physician would be here in the metabolic health space. So, as mentioned previously, I had my own way of navigating into this space. Not too long ago, I was looking, I probably met those criteria for metabolic syndrome that we went over in the first introduction to metabolic health lecture for this group. I was looking at borderline hypertension, was a stressed out, tired emergency physician working nights, weekends, long hours, and something had to give, and I wanted to go in the right direction. So kind of fell into the low carb space. Initially, I was quite a skeptic, but I checked it out and I kept checking it out. And then I found fasting. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So some disclosures. I do have a website. I'm a co-founder with my wife of OurLowCarb.com. As Allison mentioned, I am one of the founding member of SMHP and one of the first practitioners to get through their accrediting process. I'm also studying for the Obesity Medicine Association boards, of which I'm a member. And my bias is that I am an avid daily and sometimes longer faster for over 3 years now. I can probably count on these many fingers the amount of times I have not completed at least 14-hour time-restricted eating phase over the last 3-some years. So otherwise, I have no financial interests to disclose. I'm not getting paid by anybody. In fact, fasting costs you nothing. That's maybe why people don't recommend it more. It's free. Anybody can do it. So those disclosures out of the way, let's look at our objectives here. So I want you all in this, we can't cover everything in 20, 25 minutes, but I do want you all to learn the terminology, know the basic fasting lingo. We're going to talk, basically some very, very brief history of fasting. We're going to learn some of the benefits of fasting. I'm going to go into some, nothing is without risk, and we're going to learn some of those potential risks and pitfalls. And then obviously we'll have Q&A, and we can tell you where to get more information if you're interested. So what is fasting? Well, simply put, fasting is the voluntary abstinence from eating, as opposed to starvation, which is the involuntary absence of food. You have no choice. It's either being deliberately restricted or just not available. So, and the two mechanisms are very different, and we're going to go into that a little bit later on here in the presentation. So why is this a thing now in 2022? It's really not. Humans have been practicing fasting for millennia. The so-called fathers of the father of medicine, Hippocrates, regularly prescribed fasting for things. I think we as a species, we have an incredible knack for figuring things out. And they figured this out thousands of years ago, that in the right circumstances, fasting can be good for you. And I think also that, even now into the modern age, we probably would have figured out if something like this was really bad for us. We do have that knack of figuring things out. Fasting has been practiced for spiritual purposes, for many groups, the Buddhists, Christians, Jews, and Muslims all have some form of fasting throughout the religious calendar. So regardless of what your religious or spiritual beliefs are, it's something that's been going on for thousands of years. And I think, again, if something would be bad for us, we would have probably figured that out by now. So let's take a quick detour. Let's go over what we're going to be talking about. So if I mention some abbreviations and things that you guys will know, what it is we're talking about. A lot of you are vets in the keto space, and you'll have, you already have this down. But for anybody new who's just wanting to learn, we're talking about intermittent fasting primarily in this talk, which is also known as, in my law enforcement days, we had aliases, also known as time-restricted feeding or time-restricted eating. So when we're talking about these intermittent fasting patterns, we're primarily talking about an eating window where you fast for a certain period and you eat within a certain window during the day. And there are many such plans. Some of the most studied or most popular ones are the 16-8, meaning you eat during an 8 or 6 hour window during the day. There's alternate day fasting, which I do a lot. And then there's something called OMAD, which is 1 meal a day. And there are other strategies like 5 days on, 2 days off. In other words, you'll fast for 48 hours. So now we can kind of end the detour. Let's get back on the road here. So as a species, we've been around a long time. Our evolutionary forefathers have been around for, maybe 1 million plus years. Us as a species, we really, been top of the food chain here for probably the last 80,000 plus years. And we were always evolutionarily hunting and gathering. We're trying to survive. About 10,000 years ago, we learned to grow and harvest agriculture. And throughout that time, there was always been feast or famine. When there were times of plenty, or harvest, or You could count on, eating well and celebrating. And then there were times, particularly in the temperate areas, of famine and scarcity. And so our bodies really needed to learn to adapt. It's this metabolic flexibility to deal with food, to deal with nutrients, and to adapt if there is none, or we wouldn't be here today. It's how we rolled as a species for tens of thousands of years, and I would argue much longer. So until now. So now we learned things. We figured things out. We learned how to preserve food, drying, salting, curing, refrigeration. We can now transport. You can get these wonderful fruits and vegetables, which formerly you could only grow it in the summer in temperate climates, or you could only gather at the end of the growing season. But now they're available to us 24/7, 365, because we can fly them in from the southern hemisphere, from tropical areas where they can grow these things. Add in a restaurant on, more than one restaurant on every street corner, and convenience stores everywhere. And what do we have? It's no wonder we have a diabetes epidemic. We're in a fed state all the time, and we never really had adapted to being in a fed state all the time. So why is it bad to be in a fed state all the time? Well, if you remember from our first talk, or Diane's talk, last meeting, it's our old friend, insulin resistance. So I'm going to give you a quick version of how insulin resistance develops here.
So you like donuts, eh? Well, have all the donuts in the world! More. I don't understand it. James Coco went mad in 15 minutes.
So as you can see there, Homer just keeps feeding himself, keeps getting fatter and fatter in that example. Oops, let me go back. So with insulin resistance, and I'm not going to get into the weeds on this one since I covered it in the first talk, but if you recall there, when we eat, there's a response. The pancreas secretes insulin so as to regulate blood sugar and let us know. That's one of the adaptations to being in the fed state. You can see the green graph down here at the bottom is a normal insulin curve. It'll peak in 30 to 60 minutes, and then it'll subside over a couple hours. But as we keep stimulating insulin, if we keep stimulating it all the time, we have no place to put this energy anymore. The bank is, the suitcase is overstuffed. You can't get any more in there. And so they become resistant to the effects of this insulin. And then you see over 10 to 20 years, you gradually see these peaks. You have to create a tremendous amount of an insulin response just to get, and eventually you can't control the blood glucose. That's the pattern here in red. So I'm not going to go into everything, but insulin resistance is contributory, the insulin resistance to all these things: hypertension, stroke, polycystic ovarian syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver. Obesity is linked, and insulin resistance is linked to at least 13 types of cancer, sleep apnea. And then even without having type 2 diabetes, you can still get the complications of retinopathy, neuropathy, and kidney damage, what we call nephropathy. And eventually you get an inadequate insulin response and you're frankly diabetic. So how can fasting help with all this? Well, fasting is one tool to increase insulin sensitivity. In previous talks, we talked about therapeutic carbohydrate reduction. By not eating, fasting allows those insulin levels to decrease. Fasting then allows the body to adapt to using its fat stores for energy. So the pendulum flips and the liver flips a switch. So about 6 to 24 hours after a meal, glycogen, which is how we store glucose in the liver and in the muscles. So in the liver, these glycogen stores will start to break down. The body senses that there's no more food coming in, and so it's using up its glucose stores, and so it's going to break down these glycogen stores. And it takes about 24 hours, depending on activity level, to break down your glycogen stores in the liver. Gluconeogenesis will begin. This is new glucose, which is made from amino acids and glycerol. Ketosis begins. So the liver will start making ketone bodies from triglycerides and free fatty acid. And I put 1 to 3 days in there. That's really when it kicks into high gear when you're, but you'll start making ketone bodies in 6 to 12 hours. And this can supply up to 75% of the energy for the brain. So what is modern medicine's take on fasting? We've known about it in some spiritual and in some fashion for thousands of years. But there was a big review article in the New England Journal of Medicine that was published in 2019 that went through a lot of the research and benefits of fasting. A lot of these studies were in animal models. A rat in a cage, doesn't have to worry about some of the stresses that we humans have in modern life. So it's not all that simple to correlate animal models to human models. So I try to stick mostly with studies that have to do with human physiology. So they found that many of the health benefits of intermittent fasting are not simply the result of reduced free radical production or weight loss. That's key. It's not all about weight loss. There's a couple of studies that came to light that they've done in people who were lean, who don't have weight to lose, and they compared intermittent fasting versus a regular eating pattern. And at the end of the study period, many of these lean folks, all their metabolic markers, health markers, had improved. So it's not all about the weight loss. So intermittent fasting kind of triggers these evolutionary adaptive cellular responses, and it improves regulation of glucose, also does many other things. When we're fed, we start growing, we start storing, we're getting ready for those lean times. But if we're eating 3 meals a day and snacking in between, that intermittent fasting does not occur, and so we can't get the other half. So we're always growing. I'm sure as most of us get older, we've seen how we can quickly grow out and because we certainly don't grow up any further. So what are some of the metabolic adaptations to fasting? I'm not going to go through this whole complex diagram from that review article. I am going to tell you that they're all very favorable adaptations. We increase antioxidant levels. We increase our DNA repair functions. We have increased protein quality control. We clean up and make new mitochondria. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, the energy area of the cell. Autophagy begins. We start breaking down pieces of cellular debris to recycle, because there's no protein or energy stores coming in. So we're going to recycle some of these things that haven't been useful, and we're going to utilize them. So autophagy is very important. There's also, has been shown to decrease inflammation and decrease mTOR, which is the cellular growth signal for protein synthesis. In the long term, fasting will increase insulin sensitivity, increase something called heart rate variability, which many of your Apple Watches track when you sleep. It's shown to have benefits in the gut microbiome, in the healthy microbiome, which can then possibly one of the benefits why we have neurologic changes in neurogenic effects in the brain. We decrease our visceral fat, that's our belly fat. And we decrease, again, inflammation, and we decrease blood pressure over time. These are all good things. Can anybody argue that these adaptations to fasting are not good things? So I certainly can't, and I certainly gained all those benefits. This article in the Journal of the American Medical Association just came out a few months ago, and it's a review of fasting and obesity-related health outcomes. So the first article was just a review of the science, what those scientists thought. In medicine, we look at the evidence. We always practice what's called evidence-based medicine. And the weakest form of evidence is association or epidemiologic evidence. There's a correlation between this and that. Doesn't mean that this causes that, but there's a correlation. A better way is to check one thing against another. We'll randomize people. It's called a randomized controlled trial. And one group gets one intervention, the other group doesn't get the intervention, and you compare outcomes to see if the intervention actually does help or hurt, as the case may be. The strongest really is when you take a bunch of these randomized controlled trials and you look at them all together. This is called a meta-analysis, and that's what this paper does. They looked at 130 randomized controlled trials looking at various types of intermittent fasting. And they found 28 statistically significant associations, basically beneficial outcomes for body mass index, for weight, for fat mass, for low density lipoprotein, cholesterol, total cholesterol, triglycerides, glucose, fasting insulin, insulin resistance, and blood pressure. And their conclusion does support the role of intermittent fasting, especially modified alternate day fasting as a weight loss approach for adults with overweight or obesity. And like I said, I didn't include all the other papers because we're time limited, but I found several papers in lean people who lift weights. And we'll talk about that. And even though they didn't have any weight, they still saw benefits of the metabolic adaptations that we're talking about. So what's the conclusions from modern medicine now? That many physicians and researchers here have documented positive clinical results, as we've seen. And there are many N=1 cases, such as myself, who have had successfully utilize this tool for weight loss and metabolic health benefits. And you can too. And that's the take-home message from this. So I'm just going to conclude. I want to cover some myths. I want to cover some frequently, quoted things that, well, you're starving yourself, and that fasting will cause the body to break down muscle and protein. And this is false for the most part. So as we mentioned, there's this autophagy and protein conservation phase that the body goes into. We don't want to break down those muscles, because if you think about it evolutionarily, we need those muscles and we need that energy to go hunt down the woolly mammoth or whatever it is we're trying to work on to feed ourselves, to survive. So it wouldn't make sense, and studies have shown this. Now there is some controversy on that. At a recent presentation by Low Carb USA, Steve Finney, who's one of the prominent researchers in the low carb therapeutic carbohydrate reduction space, he is convinced that you do begin to break down some muscle mass, even though small amounts, very small amounts. So he doesn't recommend fasting for more than 24 hours. But I think you have to look at that in the circumstances. If you're somebody that's, morbidly, obese and needs to really lose a ton of weight, this is an excellent tool. If you're, somebody who is already lean or don't have a bunch of weight to lose, this is, again, you would probably consider that maybe I don't need to go more than 24 hours. But again, there's no one size fits all approach in any of this. So the other big myth that you'll hear is that, well, fasting will slow your metabolism. And again, this is false. The opposite is actually true. You will start secreting increased growth hormone. You will start secreting increased stress hormones, and norepinephrine has been shown. And these will help give you energy and keep your resting metabolic rate up. Because again, if you don't have the energy to go out and get that woolly mammoth, we wouldn't have survived to make it this far. And I'm going to go over some fasting tips or tricks. You can see the first one is no half measures. So I'm going to just play a little clip from one of my favorite shows about half measures, and then I'll explain what this means.
Moral of the story is, I chose a half measure when I should have gone all the way. I'll never make that mistake again. No more half measures, Wolf.
Okay, so what do we mean by half measures? If you're going to fast, fast. Do not cheat and go very low calorie. I made that mistake in the past. And that will, by drastically reducing calories over a few weeks even, can start lowering your resting metabolic rate. That has been shown. So either you fast, you don't eat, and then when you feed, but no half measures. So I do recommend, if you decide to pursue fasting as a strategy, that you supplement with salt and magnesium. Your body, you'll still be losing salts and electrolytes. Urine, kidneys do a pretty good job in retaining a lot of this, but you still lose some salts when you sweat and things of that nature. And you can consider a multivitamin. I don't recommend a lot of supplements. I think if you're getting a good whole foods balanced diet, but if you're fasting and you're not getting the nutrients for a period of time, then you could certainly consider a multivitamin or other vitamins. And then the other do is drink. Drink at least 2 liters of fluid a day. Clear liquids, but black coffee is fine. Green tea is especially good. There's some antioxidants and some polyphenols that are believed to help suppress appetite. Unsweetened seltzers, if your stomach starts growling, some seltzers, as you see here, when you get hungry. And then some bone broth is permissible. A 10 ounce or so cup of bone broth might have some calories in it, 25 to 50 calories, but it's got a lot of salt in it that you need. And it can be soothing to help you through some of those hunger pangs. Some people will, just can't have black coffee, and they do want some cream or MCT oil. I'm kind of a fasting purist. That's my bias. It may work for you, but I think we want to avoid any type of insulin response. Even though there's more of an insulin response to carbohydrates, you're still going to get some, although much diminished, with proteins and as well as fat. So try to stay with the clear stuff. So just a couple cautions. This is presented for informational purposes only. It should not be construed as individual or personal medical advice. You have to do all these disclaimers. If you're undergoing something like this, particularly if you're on medications or have some conditions, consult your physician, preferably a low-carb friendly practitioner, before doing any of these changes. So we got that out of the way. If you're looking for more, here's some good books that are well researched, but are applicable to both medical professionals as well as just anybody without a medical background. Dr. Jason Fung's book, The Obesity Code, was the first one that I got into, and he has a chapter in there about fasting, benefits, history, and he also wrote a second book, A Complete Guide to Fasting, and his practice is mostly about fasting as well. I think fasting works hand in hand with the therapeutic carbohydrate reduction. The two work synergistically to get insulin sensitivity and get you, adapted to burn the fat off and use fat for energy. Thank you. That's it. That's all I got. But we can answer questions for as long as you like till our time's up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crutchfield. If you can unshare your screen,
I will.
We'll be able to see everyone, because I'm sure there will be some questions. That was a wonderful presentation. I do want to say off the bat, if you're feeling overwhelmed or intimidated by all of the information he just gave you, do not think to get benefit from this, you have to jump into a 24-hour fast tomorrow. That is not the case. One of the biggest goals here is to have a period of time where you're not digesting food. You don't have that in your system, because when you don't have food in your system anymore, and food can take up to 6 hours to really fully digest. Once that food's out of your system, your body can then concentrate on some other really important things. Your immune system kicks into high gear, your memories are stored, your body heals itself. Amazing things happen. He he mentioned reduced inflammation. That's another thing that happens when we don't have food inside of our body. Autophagy, all the good proteins go around like Pac-Man, eating up the damaged cells in your body. It's not all about weight loss, which Dr. Crutchfield drove home. This is not just a weight loss tool, although people do find it to be a wonderful way to lose weight. You don't have to go 24 hours for this to be beneficial. You can start with 12 hours. Eat dinner, finish by 6:30. Don't eat anything else or drink anything with calories before you go to bed. Get up in the morning, maybe you have black coffee, you have some tea, you drink water, and just wait to eat breakfast till 6:30. You've just intermittent fasted for 12 hours. And that's where I would really recommend starting. You don't want to jump in. You don't know how your body's going to react. Do not push yourself where you're dizzy or you have brain fog or you're feeling weak. That means you have pushed yourself too far. So I love the benefits of a longer fast. It's not something you should go start tomorrow. With that being said, though, I want to take you guys' questions, and I'm sure Dr. Crutchfield will be more than happy to answer anything you're wondering about. I see everybody. Well, I can't see the people who don't have their screen on, so there's a raise hand function for those people, or you can just unmute and say, I have a question. I see that. Oh, no, that was my cursor on there. So you can raise your hand or just unmute and start talking. I know there's questions.
Well, while we're waiting for some questions, I can, you brought up a lot of good points, Allison, with, taking kind of your fasting baby steps. And I think one thing that saved me over the years, for as long as it did, was the fact that I did skip meals. As an emergency physician, I go do 12-hour shifts, and I would, be on my feet for 12 hours, and I'd never know, sometimes I wouldn't get a chance to eat for the entire shift. So I was probably exercising those fasting muscles, but then as soon as I could, I was putting all the wrong crap in my mouth to probably undo those benefits. So it can be done. I see a hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. With the 2 liters of liquid, can I let the unflavored seltzer water and black tea or green tea count towards that 2 liters, or should that really be water?
I think any liquid. I normally, there's a couple people that I work with who are in the chat tonight for the presentation, and they know that I'm usually having a couple of 10-ounce cups of coffee in the morning, and then I'll start in on my seltzer, and then I'll have some water when I get home, and have dinner with the wife. And occasionally an adult beverage in there as well. And I think it all counts. Although you have to be a little cautious with coffee because coffee can also be a weak diuretic, meaning it can cause you to lose a little bit more urine. So that's probably not the best strategy for me, but no, it does not have to be that your coffee or tea can count in that.
And I have another question. Thanks. Okay. I had read, completely separate from IF, that it's good to drink half your weight. So say you weigh 100 pounds, to drink 50 ounces of water a day, which is going to be a little bit, it's going to be more. For most of us, it's going to be more than the 2 liters. Would you agree with that? Half your weight in ounces?
half your ounces. Well, let's see, 32 ounces is a quart, right?
Yes.
No, yeah, 16 ounces is a pint, 32 ounces would be a quart.
Mhm.
So you're actually talking, that's less than 2 liters.
Oh, is it? What's a liter?
A liter, 1,000 milliliters, it's actually about 33.8 fluid ounces. So I
Oh,
generally have 2 of these a day, or at least
yeah,
a bottle and a half of these a day.
got it.
And that's my
Okay.
2 liters right there.
Yeah. Okay,
And
so, yeah.
it's kind of interesting. There's really no scientific research or hard data that says drink 8 cups of water a day. It really came out of, it was a marketing campaign. I mean, that's really where it came from. And I'm not saying don't drink water during the day, because you should, but some people overdo it. And if you drink too much water, you're going to start draining your body of minerals and electrolytes. It really does the opposite of what you want it to do. Dr. Crutchfield talked about how important it is to have salt and sodium and potassium. If you're drinking water all day, especially during a fast, and you're not getting any sodium, that water is draining you. It's draining you of calcium, which is not a good thing. So you just have to make sure you're also getting enough electrolytes. And that leads me to a question for you, Dr. Crutchfield. What type of, I know with potassium, you can overdo it. That's not something that you want to take too much of. What form do you supplement potassium in?
I don't really do a lot of potassium supplementation myself. We used to recommend, this was before I entered the low carbs, but eating foods high in potassium. Orange juice is one that comes to mind, as do bananas. But then you're dealing with a carbohydrate load that I think is probably worse. But you can get a lot of potassium, in animal foods, in meat, and animal-based products is a very good source of potassium. There are some of the vegetables that are higher in potassium as well. But and you probably could school me a little bit better. But we, when we were looking to raise somebody's potassium in the emergency department, we always preferred some of the oral as opposed to the liquid. I mean, we preferred the liquid oral supplements as opposed to the pills. Liquids get absorbed a little bit faster. You have to watch potassium in the emergency setting. You can't put it in too fast, or it can cause the heart to go crazy. If your potassium suddenly spikes in the bloodstream, it can cause your heart to do funny things like stop, which is why potassium is in one of the protocols in many of the lethal injections at some of the Department of Corrections in the states that do execution. So for 99.99% of us, though, drinking water and getting your minerals are not that much of an issue. We regulate it pretty well. The kidneys, unless you have kidney disease or some of these diabetes problems that have insulin resistance problems that have led to kidney disease, you should be regulating it very, very well. Your water needs vary. And Allison's right. There aren't really no studies to say this is the amount of water you must drink a day, because you can't do that. It's, it varies by temperature, humidity, activity levels, all these things. And so we have a regulatory area in the brain, and 99.9% of us, that regulatory says drink. And if you're thirsty, drink. If you're not thirsty, don't drink. But since you're not eating and taking some fluids in during a fast, that's why I do recommend doing the 2 liters.
Thank you. Another thing that does not have any scientific backing behind it, 2 myths actually. One is that eating 5 to 6 small meals a day is better for you than 2 or 3 main meals. In fact, we're really finding that that is not the case, because when you eat those 5 to 6 small meals, you are constantly, that blood sugar and the insulin is constantly roller coastering up and down. And you never really have a chance to digest that previous meal before you add something on top of it. And the other thing is, there was a big push, mainly by Kellogg's back in the day, to make this breakfast is the most important meal of the day. There's no scientific backing behind that. Now, that's very individualized. Some people feel really good when they have a big breakfast, and that for them is their most important meal of the day. I personally was so happy when I learned. I was forcing myself to eat breakfast because I thought I needed to. And I was really relieved to find out, wait a minute, I don't have to do that. I feel so much better if I can start my morning, have my tea, do my workout, get some work done, then eat a nice, big, healthy meal. It's really up to you, but that is a myth. You don't have to eat breakfast.
That's a good point, and I would heartily endorse that, second it, as it were. But it does bring up something as far as when you're doing time-restricted eating, and your eating window is 6 to 8 hours a day, it is better to eat earlier in the window. My wife and I have had this discussion because I work all day long. I fight traffic. I get home, 6-ish. And then it's time for us to have our meal together. And, so we may be done eating at, 8 p.m. And, that's a little later than I would like. Because we also, there's so many other factors at play with our metabolism. The circadian rhythm has to do with, growth hormone secretion, and cortisol, which peaks, in the middle of the night. And so being in a fed state can affect all of that. So I certainly agree that breakfast is not the most important meal of the day, but definitely you want to not have your eating window going too late. I've heard maybe don't eat any more than 6 hours before the mid-cycle. I think that was actually presented, Peter's here. He can probably chime in on that one or verify. That was the last low carb in Boca, where there was a talk on sleep. They did recommend that you don't feed until later in the evening before you're sleeping for those reasons. So.
Yeah, I know sleep, you should definitely stop eating within 2 to 3 hours of the time you go to bed. And if you can push that back even further, you're probably going to sleep better. But if the choice is, I'm going to intermittent fast and start my day later so I can eat with my family, or I'm not going to do it at all, you got to just do what works for you. This should be a stressor in your life. It should be something that makes you feel good.
I want to say something about that. I feel that sometimes people are very focused on, I should do this or I should do that. But what I found that's really important is you need to start listening to your body. Because personally, for the most part, I never eat breakfast either. But then some days I wake up hungry. And those days I do eat something. And then I have days where I'll have like a brunch around noon and I won't be hungry in the evening. So then I won't eat. So I think it's really important that people realize you have to look at yourself. If you're hungry, eat. Don't force yourself to fast. And if you're not hungry, don't eat, because that means your body doesn't feel it needs anything at that point. So I really think it's important to realize that it's not so important to do something because you think you should do it because that's healthy. You need to figure out what's right for you.
Yes, thank you, Susanna. I could not agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. And what works in with your lifestyle. My last comment would be women. Intermittent fasting might work and look a little bit different for us, especially if you're still cycling. You don't want to be doing long fasts, particularly the week leading up to your period. So if you are postmenopausal, it's pretty flexible as far as the fasting goes, but please don't be doing long-term fasts if you are a woman that is still cycling. That you need to get a little more information on that.
Last comment on that, I did kind of cut out. There are some differences between men and women, as you mentioned. You know, women may start seeing some of the benefits.
Okay. Enjoyed your talk. Do you have any advice on how to time an intermittent fasting regime with an active exercise program?
Exercise fasted all you want, and there's a lot of literature and a lot of data to support that. There was recently a type 1 diabetic who did these 100-mile ultra marathons. There was a group of them throughout the UK, totally, fasted. And there are some world-class athletes now who are cycling. You don't need the carbohydrates. That's a myth. Dr. Tim Noakes, who wrote The Lore of Running, tore out the pages of that chapter of his book on nutrition, and you can function quite well and exercise fast. I generally do my high intensity interval training once a week, fasted, and then about an hour and a half later is when I'll eat a very high protein type meal, and that's been shown to help build muscle if you're doing that type of training. But you can, once you're adapted to burn fat, you can do zone 2 cardio for till the cows come home. While you're fasted, your heart will run on free fatty acids, and the rest of the muscles will work with the free fatty acids, and they have more than enough glycogen stores. So yeah, but if you're going to work out fasted, then consider a high protein meal about an hour and a half later or so.
Okay, thanks.
That's a great question. There's another question. Do you have to fast at the same time every day? There really are no hard and fast rules. If you come up with a routine that you like to eat breakfast at 10:30 and finish dinner by 6:30, and that works for you, great. But like Susanna said, you may wake up the next day and you're starving at 7 a.m. Eat at 7 a.m. So every day we want our bodies to be what Dr. Crutchfield called metabolically flexible. We want to be able to say, today I ate during a 10-hour window and my body knew how to handle it. Tomorrow I ate during a 3-hour window and my body knew how to handle it. So there's no hard and fast rules. You really have to do what works into your own lifestyle. Dr. Crutchfield, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's perfect. There are many, particularly if you look at some of Dr. Fung's books or some of his stuff on the internet, there are many different patterns. There's the alternate day fasting, where you just eat normally on one day and then you fast the next day, for 24 hours. You can also, stop eating in the evening one night, fast the entire next day, and then eat again the next morning. You can vary it up throughout the week, or you can just stick to, what, like Allison said, what works for you. Like I said, my wife and I, I'll eat somewhere between noon and 3 p.m. and then we'll have our dinner around 6 to 7 p.m. and then we're done. So whatever works for you. And the one point I did want to make about men and women is women may actually see benefits from fasting more than men, beginning at 14 hours rather than 16. So those women may see benefits a little earlier, some of these processes, adaptive responses starting a little earlier. So you don't have to go all that long.
I just put our email, azlowcarb@gmail. If you are here tonight and you're not on my email list to send you a link to our next talk, please just shoot me an email at azlowcarb. You heard me the first time. Now I can't say it. azlowcarb@gmail.com. And I'll add you to the list. We don't send out a bunch of stuff, but when there is an upcoming meeting, I'll let you know what the topic is, and I'll send you the link to the meeting. So please get on that. Any other questions before I let you go? Thank you all so much for showing up tonight. Thank you, Dr. Crutchfield, for a wonderful presentation and for staying to answer questions for us. That was super informational and helpful. Wonderful job.
Thank you for hosting.